Hello and welcome to the President's Podcast right here on the record with the Ohio Senate. The views the news excludes. I'm John Fortney, the Director of Communication with the Senate Republican Caucus, the Majority Caucus in the Ohio Senate. Always great to have back on the program Ohio Senate President Rob McColley, Republican from Napoleon, Ohio. We're really cranking up a lot of energy, a lot of action right now, busy times, and we had a busy session day and kind of a surprise to start out the week on Monday with the nomination of a new lieutenant governor. Ohio knows him very well. If you're a Buckeye fan, a Buckeye football fan, former Ohio State head coach Jim Tressel, who also won not only the one national championship at Ohio State, but 4 national championships when he was head coach for Youngstown State University and the Penguins. And on Wednesday, during the Senate session, the Senate confirmed him to be the next lieutenant governor. What does he bring to the table?
Well, a lot of Ohioans may not realize his record of service after he left Ohio State as their football coach. He's done a great job in public education, particularly higher education. He's been active in many discussions regarding public education. He's undeniably one of the best leaders that Ohio has to offer, and somebody who, from the time I've gotten to know him in his capacity primarily at Youngstown State, has continued his record of service with impeccable integrity. Somebody who is there for all the right reasons. He could very easily be on a beach in Florida right now, but he truly believes that Ohio has given him and his family an awful lot, and I believe in the spirit of Woody Hayes, to evoke another name of an Ohio State head football coach, he believes it's his job to pay it forward for future generations, and I think that's what he's going to be doing.
He was very well respected on campus at Youngstown State during his 10 years as president there, and of course, former Ohio Congressman Bill Johnson from the 6th District took over after Jim Tressel retired at Youngstown State. But Youngstown State on their own website talked about how Tressel did a great job actually increasing enrollment, and he understands that the future of Ohio really lies with its young people and stopping the brain drain.
You know, he was the first of his kind in some respects in Ohio as far as university presidents were concerned, where he entered and didn't really have the typical mold of a university president with a PhD and a ton of higher education experience, coming in as a faculty member to start their career and then moving their way up through the typical ranks. Instead, he came in with a leader's and an operator's mindset to try to find a different lens, really, to find solutions that was desperately needed at Youngstown State. He turned the institution into what it is today. You go up there and you can't drive around campus without seeing remnants of his legacy still there. Jim and Ellen Tressel Way, as you're driving through campus, you go to the restaurants around campus, they all have photos of him all over the place. He's about as close to a saint as you can be in Youngstown based on what I've seen. Somebody who's incredibly well respected and frankly, again, could have gone anywhere after his career ended at Ohio State. But chose to go back to Youngstown, a place where he started his head football coaching career, and reinvest his time and energy back into the community. And I think it's a remarkable record of service.
It was really interesting, too. You always learn a lot in this job, no matter how long that you've been working in the legislature. But when the opening for lieutenant governor happened, there is a specific article within the Ohio Constitution that addresses a vacancy for the lieutenant governor's job. And it's under Article 3, and it is Section 17A. And it requires a vote of both chambers. And that's not the case if there's a vacancy with the other executive offices. But that's an interesting part of the law. And why do you think that it was important to, because the Senate does have advise and consent authority, but there were no hearings scheduled for him. It just went straight to the floor. Why was that important?
Well, I think you can look at the vote total. There was one no vote out of the entire chamber. Jim Tressel has a reputation that speaks for itself. He's a man of high character and integrity. I think everybody realizes that. He's been around the State House numerous times in his capacity as president of Youngstown State. Others, maybe we would have taken a little bit more time, but I think everybody's mind's pretty well made up on Jim Tressel at this point. And so it's important as well to, in this case, grant a little bit of deference to the governor as well and understand that he's been without a lieutenant governor for almost a month at this point. And I think he's got some important work that needs to be caught up with, and Jim Tressel's ready to step into those shoes.
A legacy of service, without a doubt. Also, when we talk about Jim Tressel, we were talking about his time as president of a university at Youngstown State University. Senate Bill 1, priority piece of legislation, hence Senate Bill 1, the Advance Ohio Higher Education Act, sponsored by State Senator Jerry Cirino, sort of a carryover of Senate Bill 83 that almost made it to a full floor vote in the House last year in the 135th General Assembly, but it had its hearings. It made it to the floor, and there was an extended set of hearings, especially on Tuesday, that went something like 10, 11 hours. Why was it important to go ahead and get Senate Bill 1 a floor vote so quickly?
This is not a matter of first impression for the Senate. We passed this last General Assembly after an awful lot of debate and discussion. The bill is largely the same as what we already passed last General Assembly. Opinions are already well known of the members of the Senate as to the contents of the bill and whether it should become law. The biggest importance here is getting it over to the House and giving the House a chance to pass it. I would expect there will be some more time as it sits over in the House, but it's nevertheless something that's an important reform that we already passed before. There's not a need to drag it out over the course of several months when our members have already spoken and are already on the record.
Do you think it will definitely remove the sense of the cancel culture on campus and really bring maybe a breath of fresh air to students who have felt like, oh, I don't dare disagree with my woke professor because I might get kicked out of class or not get the grade? Because, as I said on this program a couple different times about Senate Bill 1, my own daughter had a bad experience with that. So, what's your overall message about basically ending the cancel culture on campus and really having a true institution that educates rather instead of indoctrinates?
There has been an ideological capture in many ways on campus, and this is through self-reported political data. The Carnegie Institute, I believe, and then UCLA has picked up the banner over the last several decades of conducting a study of college faculty, asking them for self-reported political data. Senator Brenner actually cited the study in his remarks. And it has gone from being, we always understood college campuses were going to be left-leaning by and large, but it's gone from being maybe 40 to 20 liberal to conservative at the beginning of the century to now being well over 60% to less than 10% in the most recent version that I've seen. And so you're starting to see a lack of diversity of thought on college campuses, and many students have reported through other surveys that they view it as the inability to fully express themselves and under those circumstances, and many even faculty members have said they feel an inability to advance in large part because of their leanings that may not be left enough, because of the fact that it's by and large between 60 and 70% left-leaning faculty and even administrators that are running these institutions. And so that's not good in the long run for higher education. That's not good in the long run for our young people at these institutions either.
And we're going to hear from State Senator Jerry Cirino, the sponsor of Senate Bill 1, here in just a few minutes. But you're a lawyer, and before I leave Senate Bill 1, one of the key things on higher education reform was a bill that passed as part of the budget in the last General Assembly, and that established the 5 centers of civics and basically constitutional study. And I remember you making a great point about we need to have lawyers who can debate points without getting offended about every little thing, which has certainly been the case. And I thought Senator Brenner made a good point, as you said on the floor, talking about we now have all these safe spaces on college campuses, which are really spaces of segregation, where not everybody is welcome. I mean, from your standpoint as a lawyer, if you need competent legal counsel, you need to have somebody who can calmly listen to the other side and then represent your client to the fullest of your ability without getting offended and say, I can't deal with this.
It is, for the law profession, the legal profession in particular, it is your duty to be able to take the plight of your client and make arguments in favor of your client, regardless of whether they reflect your personal views. And as a result of that, the concerning trend, and this is why one of these civics centers is set up at the University of Toledo College of Law, the important element of that is to ensure that insulated from the bureaucracy and sometimes the administrative capture that's ideologically synchronous on the left, is the fact that you have this institute that is insulated from it, insulated from any involvement from those typical bureaucratic arms, in a way to make sure that it is a place where people can have diverse thought and diverse viewpoints, learn to discuss them civilly, and in a manner that allows people to exchange ideas in a manner where people won't get offended and hopefully will learn something in the process.
Yeah. Senate Bill 1 now on to Senate Bill 2. It is the energy reform, sweeping energy policy reform here in Ohio. The language is out. It's a little bit different on the Senate side than it is in the House, but it basically focuses on increasing generation and capacity here at home, and really revises the tax structure, switching it more to the transmission than the generation side. What's the 30,000-foot message on Senate Bill 2 here in Ohio?
Well, our bill actually would not shift it to the transmission side. Our bill actually just lowers the tangible personal property tax on new generation. The tax rate that we pay, or we require generation projects to pay on on their generation facilities, really, is through the roof relative to many other states. And if we are going to be an energy dominant state where we are generating as much power here as we can, we are extracting natural resources for the use in our economy and our energy production, and we're setting ourselves up to be the economic giant of the Midwest that I know many of us feel we're already capable of being with the right policy, then we need to look inward and say, what are we going to do to bring that type of investment and encourage that type of investment in Ohio?
One of the things, too, wouldn't you agree that Ohio is sitting on significant reserves, especially for natural gas? Because as we have seen the decommissioning of coal-fired plants, which you can go all through southeast Ohio and see, coal mines that have closed and decommissioned coal plants that have been torn down, but you do see along some of the major thoroughfares between Marion and Belpre, for example, there is a natural gas plant that provides power for a huge industrial complex. Is that the future for Ohio, natural gas and the clean energy elements it brings?
Yeah, well, I believe there's a considerable amount of companies out there that are looking at some of the uncertainty as far as power supply is concerned and saying we want to hedge that risk and we want to generate behind our own meter. And so data centers, for example, they want to get to the market quickly. They want to be able to get up and running to stay ahead of the curve of all the technological advancements, particularly in AI, but they need an awful lot of data center capacity. Well, those data centers are significant drags on our energy reserves that are in the grid as far as electricity is concerned. Many of those data center developers are looking at, well, is there policy in place that would allow us to build energy generation behind our own meter? But what I mean by that is they're not getting it off the grid that we typically see. They're generating it themselves and directly connecting to it. Those are the policies that are going to allow us to accelerate this type of investment, this major investment going forward, in a way that will allow that type of investment to continue in Ohio while also not putting stress on the grid that the vast majority of Ohio is going to remain on.
Ohio Senate President Rob McColley, insightful as always. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with State Senator Jerry Cirino, the sponsor of Senate Bill 1. We're back with State Senator Jerry Cirino, Republican from Kirtland, Ohio, and the lead sponsor of Senate Bill 1, which passed on the Senate floor on Wednesday. Well, when you look back over the last 2 years, Senate Bill 83, it got through the Senate, it made it through the House Higher Ed Committee, and then it stalled for numerous reasons, mainly politics on the House floor. But it really came back even stronger in the 136th General Assembly as the priority bill in the Ohio Senate, Senate Bill 1. How gratifying is it to see it get through with another marathon committee hearing on Tuesday night.
Yeah, well, like with anything that takes a long time to do and it's hard to get done, when it does finally happen, it's obviously a very good feeling. But I'm actually, in retrospect, very glad that Senate Bill 83 in the last General Assembly did not pass. Senate Bill 1 is a much stronger, more comprehensive bill with many of the same elements that 83 had. But I think it's going to serve our higher education institutions much better even than 83 would have.
You know, I was very interested to hear during the committee hearings on Tuesday night. That went how long?
Over 8 hours.
Over 8 hours. That's a new record then from the prior bill.
I believe so, yes.
So you had a lot of these students and the university professors that came out and testified against the bill. And I was very interested to learn the following from them, that Senate Bill 1 would cause climate change. It would cause a mass migration out of Ohio, that people are going to die, and that it would end higher education as we know it. The hyperbole, I'm like, if you're going to come out against a bill, at least come out with some reasonable or believable facts.
Right.
But I mean, they just went off the deep end.
Well, many of the people who testified, while I disagree with them, at least presented their ideas in a cogent, intelligent fashion. But a lot of people had testimony that was suggesting those things that you mentioned, that it would cause cancer, it was going to cause homelessness, and people to drop out of school. I mean, all kinds of things that were absolutely ridiculous. And these are, in some cases, PhDs, faculty members, and certainly a lot of students who were suggesting these things. And some people, unfortunately, in the Senate, on the Democrat side, were kind of going along with that.
They really fought hard, I think, to protect things like the no strike. They wanted that gone out of the bill. But I thought you made a really good point, as did some of the other members, about, well, why should university professors be able to hold the student body hostage, maybe at the end of a semester or during the time when you're going to be taking your finals and trying to get your degree, and suddenly you can't go to class?
Well, here's something to think about. Ask yourself, because the Democrats on the floor today were referring to the fact that there are very few faculty strikes, and that is correct. But if so, then why would they object to barring faculty strikes? And the reason is because they use the threat of a strike as a negotiating tool with the presidents of the university with whom they're negotiating in order to get something that they want in their negotiations. So it's not so much the strike itself, it's the threat of a strike that, and they're using students as pawns in this process. That is the problem.
You talked about how a third party should not be able to get in front of a contract that a student has already paid for.
Right. If you sign up and pay for a service, and that service is going to be given to you in return for your payment, why would a third party be able to come in and interrupt that? And it's the same thing for students. Students pay for tuition. They very often borrow money to pay that tuition, or their parents pay it for them. And that is a contract that exists between the institution. In this case, they happen to be a state institution, and for instruction. And that instruction should be delivered as promised. And we shouldn't be able to have a labor unit of faculty members, a third party, interrupt that because they want a better dental plan or longer sabbaticals.
One thing they also didn't want was performance reviews of tenured faculty, which was always a tough thing for me to understand and get my head around, because if you worked in the private sector, like the old Ghostbusters line was, I've worked in the private sector, they expect results. So every year, every 6 months, there was a performance review from your boss about, well, you need to do a better job here, but you're doing a great job here, and you're adequate in this area. What's so wrong with performance reviews of tenured faculty?
Well, that's a question I asked myself many times. And again, academia has just been used to operating sort of in a bubble. And the rest of the world has been doing performance reviews, doing what we called in the private sector when I was in it, continuous improvement activities, right? To make sure that whether there's tenure or whether there's no tenure, it doesn't matter. Everybody needs to be continuously improving what they're doing. Nobody should coast. Employees who coast are not productive. They're holding the organization back. And that's all we're asking for, is for our universities to hold themselves to that same standard that we have had for decades in the private sector.
Ending the indoctrination and focusing on education. And then you would hear the people opposed to the bill say, that's not happening on campus. But it absolutely has been happening on campus for quite a while.
The studies have been out about how predisposed faculty and staff are, not just the faculty, it's the staff, that identify as Democrats. Okay, there's no question about that. If somebody wants to argue that, I would welcome the facts that they would present. There's no question that there is a liberal bias on campuses, and that needs to be corrected, because in that kind of environment, you can't possibly have diversity of thought, because diversity of thought would not be welcomed in a politicized environment.
I told the story, and I think you were actually on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, where I told the story about how my youngest daughter called me one night on the phone. I was driving back from, I can't remember where it was, and she said she's an elementary education major, now teaching in her first year as a second grade teacher at a local school system out of central Ohio. And she said, you won't believe what my professor actually said to the class today, that we were going to be talking about politics in an elementary education class because education is about politics and, quote, you all need to be more woke. That intimidated her, Senator Cirino. And I said, well, what did you say? Did you say you disagree with that? Well, no. She said it was me and a couple other girls who were really kind of offended, but afraid to say, why is this even a topic? And we disagree with, the woke political standpoint.
Well, many of the people testifying yesterday, and some of our Democrat members on the floor today, kept repeating the question, what is the problem? We don't think there's a problem that needs to be solved here. And I think that's very shallow view of the situation. There's no question. And they talked about how many more people they had at their hearing on the opponent side than we had last week in the proponent testimony. The fact of the matter is, I could have produced another 30 or 40 people. So many students and faculty that I talked with that have contacted me have said, here's the information I want to give you, here's what's going on, but don't use my name, I cannot come in and talk. That makes the point that I'm trying to drive home in the first place, that there is self-censorship going on. And of course, those participating in the liberal bias don't view it as a liberal bias. To them, it's the way it should be. And it excludes people that don't think like them or don't follow the institutional orthodoxy. And that has to change. This is a good bill for Ohio, and it's going to be good for higher education.
And that really is the danger when you talk about how they think that they're right and this is the way it is, and there's not another side to the story, and anybody who wants to discuss whatever the topic would be then is ostracized, canceled, or dismissed, much like a real key part of your bill is ending the discriminatory DEI litmus testing, especially for the hiring process.
Right, and if some of the Democrats want to say, well, there hasn't been a problem with that, well then why did Ohio State 2 years ago, in anticipation of 83, because it was already out at that time, why did they make a board policy change to eliminate litmus testing in hiring? Because it was going on in the first place. And we know it's still going on. They may have a policy, and not just Ohio State, but many institutions. What we don't hear about, or there is no strict evidence for, but we know it's going on because of the feedback we've gotten, that when these search committees are looking for people to fill spots, either faculty or staff, we know that they are applying some litmus testing. They just don't keep a record of it. And so it's discriminatory, and that's what's wrong with DEI. It is institutional discrimination.
And when we're training young minds, whether it be in law school or medical school, I always like to use the analogy of what skin color, sexual preference, or whatever it may be, would you like your heart surgeon to be? What's more important, that, the DEI aspect of everything, or that they are the best, the most competent at what they do?
Right, and the most experienced. And so I think the pendulum has swung too far to the left. we may never get it far right of center, but let's get it to center. And let's neutralize this stuff so that our students, they can believe when they graduate whatever they believe in. And if they've made that decision on their own, come to their own conclusions on issues, fine. The other thing that the Democrats keep bringing up, and they brought it up today on the floor, is that certain subjects are forbidden to be brought up and discussed. That is blatantly wrong. It is black and white in the bill, and I know the bill pretty well, that we identify controversial subjects to bring examples forward and to tie that to what I call institutional neutrality. On those types of issues, it's not an exhaustive list, but it's a general list. Are the areas where we believe that the institution should not take a public position. Institutional neutrality in academics have been out there for decades and decades. They have just, many of them, gotten away from that, thinking that it is woke to take positions against Israel, against Palestine, against South Africa, whatever the case is. They should not be taking public positions. Individuals can.
You can have those discussions in the classroom.
You can talk about anything, and all we say in the bill is that there should be a balanced approach, and if somebody has a divergent opinion from what the professor is presenting, they should feel free and actually encouraged to express themselves.
Well, that's how people learn. In the newsroom, we used to call that objectivity. It seems like there's not a lot of that anymore in newsrooms. It's more advocacy journalism. But again, that's another show. You have a well-known former president of a university that the Senate took a vote on to confirm as the next lieutenant governor. We talked a little bit with Senator McColley, President McColley, about that, but Jim Tressel confirmed by the Senate as the new lieutenant governor of Ohio, and when he takes the oath of office, it will be official. Your thoughts on Jim Tressel? You've worked with him in the past.
Well, when I saw the news, I thought it was just a great bit of news. Full disclosure, I'm good friends with Jim Tressel. And I've admired him for all of his accomplishments in the state of Ohio. But we actually worked together on Senate Bill 83, formulating that when he was president of Youngstown State. He did wonderful things there. I remember him giving me a tour of the place in his workforce development building that he had just built and outfitted, working with local industry to try to train students who might otherwise not get the training they need to have to get good jobs. And I believe, if memory serves me correctly, that he and his wife donated $5 million to one of the buildings to outfit it properly for workforce development. So he's a quality guy. Obviously, his sports accomplishments go without saying, but I think he's been such an asset for the state of Ohio. I think he's a perfect choice for lieutenant governor.
Well, he certainly loves the state of Ohio. He always cared about, of course, Ohio State. He won the national championship at Ohio State for the Buckeyes, but he also won 4 national championships when he was head coach at Youngstown State University for the Penguins, and then as Senate President. Then as the university president, he actually drove enrollment there, increased enrollment for the first time in a long time. So he understands that results matter and that we need to be doing everything that we can to educate our young workforce here to keep them in Ohio.
And he would have made more changes at Youngstown State if his hands weren't tied on how extreme his changes could be to turn that place around. And it would have been even better if he wasn't tied, if he didn't have his hands tied in restrictions on faculty approvals of this action or that action.
Isn't it interesting how you and I have talked about Senate Bill 1 and the last GA, Senate Bill 83, that for some reason the faculty thought that the university worked for them, that the university was there for the faculty. The university is actually there for the students, and aren't the trustees the ones who are really in charge?
Well, part of the bill that's, I think, doesn't maybe get as much discussion, but it's really important, I did highlight it today in my comments on the floor, is that this bill enables presidents and their boards with more authority over policy. And as I've talked to many, many board members and gotten to know them, we've been spending a lot of time discussing how they are the board of governors of that institution, whether it's community college or university, and that they shouldn't have to wait for the state to take actions and do things. A lot of what's in Senate Bill 1 and was previously in 83, a lot of these actions could have been taken by boards of trustees. But as I mentioned today, the universities and the community colleges have not stepped up to making changes that would actually be in their best interest. So we're happy to provide the impetus for them to forcefully make some changes.
Well, congratulations on 21st Century Higher Education Plan passing the Ohio Senate, called the Advance Ohio Higher Education Act. Now moves on to the House for hearings there. And what's your expectation there?
Oh, my expectation, I think we had the votes to pass 83, quite frankly, and other things, as you mentioned, got in the way. I think the environment is much more positive. I've been in close touch with members of the House for the last year, actually, working to try to get 83 passed. When that wasn't going to happen, I've been staying in close touch with House members. I think Tom Young, who's chairman of the Higher Education Committee, is on board. He introduced a companion bill, which is exactly the same as Senate Bill 1. I think there's a predisposition to support this bill.
And if you want to see the news conference of the original rollout of Senate Bill 1 with State Representative Tom Young, Senator Cirino, and also the chair of the Senate's Higher Education Committee, Senator Christina Rogner, you can find that on our YouTube page. But something also that is really a must-see is we call it a gaggle. It's a gaggle of reporters, usually after a Senate session, but after the Rules Committee, Senator Cirino stepped up to the plate, surrounded by Ohio Legislative Correspondent Association or State House reporters, and took question after question for almost 8 minutes from them about Senate Bill 1. And you did a great job pushing back on the narrative that they were wanting to write about. So you can also find that on our YouTube page. Always remember, you can go to ohiosenate.gov, click on news, and you'll see also a link to that interview that he did with all the State House reporters that will get you to our YouTube page. State Senator Jerry Cirino, congratulations on Senate Bill 1 passing the Ohio Senate. Thanks for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.